All right, welcome everyone. We've got a number of folks on the line, so I think we are good to get started. So again, thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Stop Chasing Ghosts, How to Eliminate False Positives from Your SOC. I'm joined today by Romy Hike, and I'll give some housekeeping notes before we get going. So first, if you have any issues with the Zoom, you can contact us via the chat. We will be sending a recording after the webinar wraps, most likely tomorrow. And then we have some bonus content coming too. In the weeks ahead, we'll have an ebook to accompany the webinar. We're excited to share that. And then lastly, everyone is muted on the call, but you can ask questions at any time via the Q&A tab, and Romy will answer those live at the end of today's session. So first, a little bit about who we are. I am Nicole Canula. I oversee marketing for the Kella team in North America. And I'm joined by Romy Hike from our Ultra Red team, which is also part of the Kella group. We also have Sling as part of the Kella group, and a very high level. Kella Group is a leader in threat and exposure intelligence, and we help enterprises to protect digital assets and empower governments and law enforcement agencies to fight cybercrime. We have the Keller Group's solutions span CTI, CTEM, TPRM, and Gen AI security. And without further ado, we'll get right to it. I'll hand it over to Romy and we can dig in.
Hi, everyone. Really glad to have you all here. My name is Romy. I've been leading product at UltraRed for the past almost 4 years. Today, we're going to go through a bit about the ghosts and what type of ghosts you guys are probably dealing with. So what the noise is, these ghosts, what they mean, what is their potential impact, what their costs is, what the reason is behind the scenes, why are these ghosts happening, and then how we can fix that. Fixing that, we're also going to be understanding the process behind it and then the potential results that you should be expecting. So speaking about the actual problem itself, we have a few metrics here, but I want to first explain what's happening and what this noise is. Essentially, you're flooded with meaningless noise because you have a lot of different tools and not essentially the exact context that you need for each and every one of them. These tools are not necessarily fully integrated into one another, and they're not necessarily related in the terminologies themselves as well. When we're talking about the amount of alerts, you can see we have on average about 17,000 alerts per week for SOC teams. And that's a result of multiple platforms reporting multiple things, sometimes important, sometimes duplicated, and sometimes serious. The amount of alerts that are actually false positives currently is anywhere between 50 to 60%. Some experience 25, some even experience as much as almost 100%. Now we can see that 99% in MSSPs, mostly because they just don't have the full context or the full reach, technical reach in to understand everything and get more confidence on their reports. When we're talking about the actual impact of false positives, it's really important to also talk about this death spiral of productivity, where if we analyze the cost, it breaks down into actually starting with lots of alerts that deal to this sort of burnout. You guys are tired, exhausted. Therefore, that leads into less investigations actually happening because, again, you're tired. You don't have time and you don't have the capacity. As a result, more false alarms or real threats fall between the cracks and actually go exploited or just create more noise down the line, which generate more alerts after the fact. Repeating that, we're just getting an exponential amount of backlog that's continuously increasing. As a result, you can see that about a third of the time is lost on false positives. More than 400 hours per week per organization is wasted, which translates to more than $1 million for large corporates per year. The amount of alerts that goes ignored is more than 80% purely because there are just too many. You can't deal with those. And 62% of the teams are just frustrated. They're pissed off. They can't deal with this amount. And then you get into burnout. People just almost losing hope in fixing those and even losing trust in the tools that you're using. And what is the actual risk of this? When we get into the hidden threat behind it, we can see that 50% at least say that they are actually missing the alerts because they, again, can't get to them or just because there are just too many. Also, on top of that, we have almost 70% that ignore because they assume the alerts are just false positives. So they discard them, they don't take care of them, and then actual threats go unnoticed. We have a poll here, just to ask a few questions. Which of these has your teams done recently? Was it hire more analysts? Have you tuned your alerts to just get less or more? Did you ignore them, burn out, even quit?
And we invite you all to pop your answers into the chat right now. We'll keep an eye on it. Wait just about a minute if anybody wants to share, and then Romy can share his personal thoughts on it and what he sees and hears are most common. I think the audience might be shy, Romy.
So actually what we see from our customers a lot of the time is continuous tuning of alerts. Now that there's some sort of a plateau that you get to where it just isn't efficient anymore. You either fine tune it too much to the point where you miss, or to the point where you just don't have enough rules so things just aren't caught. So getting to that sweet spot is nearly impossible. It's like chasing perfect. But that's something that we hear people continuously do, and we're going to get to the validation step. You need to go into a dynamic approach rather than something that's hard written rules that you can just follow without even getting the context or making modifications as you go. What do you think, Nicole? Should we move on or should we wait for more answers?
I think we can keep going. Gives us
Awesome.
something to think about, though.
Okay, so what is the reason behind all of this? Essentially, this is because context matters. Your tools fall short in many, many places, anywhere from actual network understanding, how your network is split, diced, and sliced, whether it's an internal network, is it an external one, is it actually exposed, and does it communicate with anyone that's actually posing the threat? If the threat is external, for example, we're talking about initial access that I care about, is that asset actually exposed to the internet? On the other hand, if I'm talking about a vulnerability that's in my internal network, can an attacker actually reach it? And if not, then I don't need to necessarily prioritize it because that's an unlikely attack path. We also have to take into consideration authentication layers, multi-factor, and other things to see whether, again, is that service accessible? If not, that can be considered a false positive potentially. We also have asset relevance, which basically allows you to understand how much you care about an asset business-wise. If you don't care about it too much, again, that's something to help you prioritize things a bit lower. Most importantly, I think, and something we're going to talk about also in the next couple of slides, is the exploitability. Can you actually exploit something using this vulnerability? Now, this ties back into the actual number of CVEs that we have. If you're familiar or unfamiliar with CVEs, these are essentially vulnerabilities that are found on common products and services around the world. Problem is, there are tens of millions of CVEs, and most of the scanners cover a lot of them. Again, here we get into another problem. Why is that actually a problem? Because if you detect all of them and you don't validate any of them to see whether they are actually exploitable, can they actually cause impact if someone would take them? You're not going to get anywhere. On top of that, we have the EPSS metric, which is basically the likelihood of something actually happening or getting exploited. This is something that is actually maintained by FIRST. And EPSS basically tells you, by collecting multiple intelligence signals, it tells you what is the likelihood of a specific CVE to be exploited. Is it common in libraries? Is it common throughout attackers and the payloads that are being tested and just out there? Is it a product that's widely used? Is there a known exploit? These sort of things help you sift through the noise, essentially minimizing from millions of different CVEs into less than 1% of CVEs that are actually exploitable and someone is actually going to be using them. This reduces so much noise and things that you don't need to actually care about. And then, instead of having dozens of high severity tickets per scan, you only get constructed ones that are unified and deduplicated. So you don't have to go ahead and then start reporting or closing other ones. Detection is not the truth. Detection can actually be considered, in my opinion, the initial lead. Essentially, it's just the start. That's where you start validating whether things are actually a threat and something that should be prioritized. When we look at detection versus validation, while detection assumes the threat, the validation confirms whether that threat is viable. Can it be used? Validation is going to be dynamic, where detection is based on static rules to see whether a version is there, whether something else, just a static pattern. It's not dynamic, it doesn't have the context. It floods your SOC, the detection. We're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of alerts, where validation is going to be filtering and narrowing down that noise for you. And of course, you're going to be focusing on actual exploitable threats only, not something or ghost busting. Now, what does validation actually look like? We start with, can an asset be communicated with from what the threat is placed? Can it be impacted? Is there impact whatsoever? Can I reproduce this in order to get a controlled environment where I can deliver a report and this can be fixed and then consistently tested? And just add more context. How important is this for me or not? If we break it down into the actual steps on the workflow, we can see it starts with discovery. So you initiate your scans, you understand what your surface looks like. What is reachable from where the point of the threat is. If it's from the outside, we're going to start the discovery or the scan from the outside. If I care about threats from the inside, I'm going to scan from the inside of the network. That's very important to get the correct context. Then we add more context in terms of whether that is a staging, production environment, whether that's an operational environment, something else, just to add more context to understand the importance of this asset. Next, and we can talk more about the safe validation, we validate and we make sure that it is actually exploitable. Here, this is a sweet spot where you need to make sure that you don't cause damage. You can check whether a vase is in a box by smashing it on the wall and seeing and hearing whether the glass breaks, or you can very gently tap it and see if you hear glass noise. This sort of analogy is where the validation is important because you want to run things continuously, which is also mentioned down here. After you make sure something is actually valid and does pose an exploitable threat, that leads you to filter out the rest of the noise. That means that you don't have to deal with the rest of the stuff, and then you move on into step 5, which is basically forwarding on whatever is left for fixing. Now, something I get asked commonly is, what happens if I don't have the information for one of these? Or let's say I don't have the context for step 2. My suggestion, move that on to the last step. Continue on in the chain because this chain might be broken earlier on. Maybe this asset is not important. Maybe it cannot be discovered from the point of the threat. So play around with this process, but make sure you cover it. Keep in mind, the goal here is to make it automated and continuous. It's not supposed to be manual. This is supposed to be happening in the background to help you cut down the noise. It replaces triage. It does not add to it. So what happens when you start validating? And these are all numbers reported by our customers as well as others in the internet. The amount of alerts you deal with reduces by, we can even say drops by 80 to 90%. The false positives that you deal with go to below 1%. Your MTTR, the time to actually remediate an issue from the time where it was discovered to actually making sure it's fixed, is basically shrinked to almost non-existent because things are moving just so much more, much faster, much more streamlined. Your teams shift from triage to threat hunting. Instead of triaging and clearing your backlog, you're actually doing security work now. And this is one of my favorite points. The collaboration across your teams improved purely because of the confidence and the low false positive ratio. Your communication grows and you trust each other. This leads essentially to the reduced risk. Some before and after, actual hard values. In terms of false positives, we can see here 50 to 90%. After that, less than 1%. So much confidence in those reports. If they started initially with almost 3 months, 2 to 3 months of MTTR, some of their remediations are happening in less than 12 hours. And we're talking enormous organizations here, 100,000, 200,000 employees plus. instead of having just unnecessarily exposed assets to the internet, that's part of the validation. You're understanding whether this asset is supposed to be exposed or not. That can actually be a threat on its own. They reduced the amount of exposure by 70%, and that all just butterfly effect of reducing other threats and vectors. The amount of hours that were saved over, I think that was a year, more than 2,000 hours saved on manual labor, and that's before automation kicked in. Now there are over 10,000 hours saved per year. Instead of having fragmented reactive cybersecurity approach, you now have a unified, everything is talking, everything is integrated, and you have the context to actually take action. So yeah, at the end of the day, if you stop chasing ghosts and you start validating, it'll help you out in your in your day-to-day. It'll help you save time, money, and your credibility. It will resolve your team from breaking and actually build it back up, gain the confidence, and you'll stop letting the actual threats slip through. So don't let ghosts run or you ruin your SOC.
That's great. Good play on words, Romy. So to back up to the poll, it turns out I had chat disabled. So we did get some direct messages via the Q&A, and thanks for those who participated. We saw the most of option B. What has your team done most recently? Tune alerts was what the feedback was. So lesson for next time for the host over here. So. Great. We did get some separate questions in the chat. So if you're ready, Romy, we can move on to those.
Sure.
Perfect. Okay. So the first one was, do you use AI for any validation of vulnerabilities?
Yes, but it depends which type of vulnerabilities and how you do it. It almost gets to the point where you don't want to be too specific because you want to allow it to be dynamic, but you don't want it to be too generic because then it starts hallucinating. There's actually a recent blog post that I've published about an autonomous hacker that's led by LLMs. And you can read about that regarding what sort of creativity you should allow LLMs in terms of judging things. And one of the biggest pain points was judging false positives and also getting false negatives because it couldn't judge correctly. So it's a game of fine-tuning it all the time.
Got it. Great. Okay. So that blog can be found on UltraRed's website directly. Perfect.
Correct.
Okay. We have a couple more. How do you safely validate vulnerabilities in a production environment without introducing risk or downtime?
Okay, so that's an interesting one. So it depends on what type of vulnerability again, but let's even take the toughest ones, SQL injections or remote code executions, those sort of things. Instead of having to go and dump a database or just ruin it, modify fields, or try to run a calculator on the remote machine, you can have other techniques, which actually we utilize in UltraRed, like pinging a temporary endpoint and then seeing whether that command goes through. There are other things to it, but essentially you want to use as least amount of noise or damage when you try to validate things and then see if the communication does succeed.
Got it. Okay. I think that covers that one. And then we'll do one more. Let's see. If we reduce false positives below 1%, how do we measure and prove that improvement to leadership and justify the investment?
So that's an interesting one. I'm going to actually go back to the slide here. So this directly talks about the terms, what you're spending now. If you're going to remove the false positive, this is actually what you're saving. So the amount of money you're going to be wasting is lowered. You're going to have, your MTTR is basically going to go up. You're going to be dealing with less vulnerabilities, less issues, and only with critical things. Reporting your MTTR is one of those key things, as well as your exposed attack surface, the amount of time you've saved. Those sort of things just pop up once you start doing the validation. You're going to see those sort of values directly popping up.
Got it. Good tie back for that one. Okay, I think that is it for today. This was short and sweet, but lots of great content. Thanks again, Romy. It was great to do a joint webinar with UltraRed, our first one. We look forward to doing more in the future.
Had
Uh,
lots of
thank-
fun.
Good. And thanks to everyone who joined us. Again, we'll be sending a recording after the session, most likely tomorrow. And then in the days, weeks ahead, we'll have an ebook coming your way as well. So don't hesitate to follow up with us if you have any questions for Kella, for Romy and the UltraRed team. We look forward to connecting with you all again soon.
Okay.
Thanks so much,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you.